Welcome to the On Water Podcast, Series 8. We're talking about AI possibilities. And today we're excited to be joined by Chris Gibbons, who is the Senior Vice President of Clinical Education at Smartbox Assistive Technology. And listeners, you might know Smartbox from their devices like the GridPad or their Grid software or Look software. So, Chris, we're so excited to have you on today.
It's great to be here. I'm really happy that we have this chance to talk about probably one of the most pivotal subjects of our professional lives. I don't want to overstate it by leaps and bounds, but I think, when we look back historically and we say, well, what are the big things that just happened in the last few decades? Well, obviously, iOS and mobile technology is one of those moments that many of us lived through. This is one of those moments that we're in right now. So happy to be here.
Yeah, wow, that's true. Well, Brenda,
Yeah, thank
talk to us, Brenda, a little bit and Chris about how you guys know each other and what you've been working on.
Right. I mean, I don't even know if either one of us can remember the first time we met. So
It's
how we
been a
know each
while.
other is a whole different ballgame. But I just feel like he's been in the industry for a really long time. And we were talking about all the advancements in AI and possibilities with AI and AAC. And just to have a baseline conversation with professionals in this arena. Chris recommended the book Brave New Words. Tell me a little bit about that, Chris.
Yeah, well, I will say that on a personal note, I grew up with a sibling who has learning disabilities, and I have three older siblings. One of them has learning disabilities, does not deal with abstract thought well, and has always had trouble in school, and did not have a lot of built-in supports during that experience. Being a family who was educating this person in the 70s, there weren't a lot of the kinds of extrinsic supports that there are now. And we
Hmm.
really had to just sort of imagine, how do you help someone that thinks differently about their own reality, thinks differently about, in some ways, how to put words together, thoughts together, make sense of some of the aspects of our physical world that we kind of have a folk understanding of. Like something is heavy and it falls fast, and it might hurt your foot, that kind of level. And so, having grown up with the challenge of living with a person who struggles at times with that kind of thinking into adulthood, it's really easy for me to understand in some ways the difficulties of kids who are trying to learn, say, symbols, for instance, trying to learn math without supports and in ways that are different from the way that maybe you and I and Sarah learned some of these skills that we just see as being, I will say, with no baggage, just like basic understanding skills you come out of school
Hmm.
with.
Hmm.
So a book like Brave New Words really resonated with me because when I first heard about what Solomon Kahn was trying to do by infusing what he'd learned through all of his experience with Khan Academy and infusing that with AI to
Hmm.
try to add some accelerant in some ways to how people learn, and maybe more critically for this discussion, add supports to the way people learn in ways that we've never been able to conceptualize before. And so
Mhm.
Hmm.
that's how I came to the book, was like with this intense interest of, wow, we've been doing education largely the same for really hundreds of years.
True.
Um, and so here's this chance with this new and emerging technology to think a little bit differently about using that technology to support students, even if we're delivering the information in a similar frame. Is
Mhm.
that too
Hmm.
abstract, or did that make sense?
Yes.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's
and
a
so I
great
think,
read.
well, go
It's
ahead,
a
Brett.
great read, and it touched on a couple of things. One, it touched on just how to kind of diffuse the fears around AI and it being replacing someone's voice in the world of AAC, and also being cheating if it came to using AI for a writing assignment for those that are AAC users. And even the fear that now teachers are going to be replaced, or special ed teachers or SLPs. I mean, there was, as with all things with new technology, there's so much fear around it, right? We just fear the unknown. We feared the loss of calligraphy, right? When the when the keyboard came out. So we fear the loss of new tech. We fear the loss of the way we've always done it. And we are nervous that somehow we are going to maybe give credit where it's not due if the computer is doing the work and that kind of thing. And I think it reframed actually the use of AI in the world of education and in AAC is more about enhancing access to materials and access to information than it was the testing of knowledge that was being everyone's so concerned about, right?
Yep. Well, so here's so there's a couple things there to unpack that just a little bit. So one is as a trained speech language pathologist, and I've been doing this only in AAC since the mid 90s when I graduated with my master's degree in this field. And as a speech language pathologist, what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to support and embellish on everything that this person is doing that we feel is therapeutically relevant to whatever it
Mhm.
is that we've decided that we're targeting with our goals and our activities for that individual. So let's take language development for an example. Um, as a human being, forget about AI for a second. As a human being, as a clinician, I'm going to walk into this room for a child who, and I'm going to use a different example, excuse me. I'm going to use just social communication.
Mhm.
Right? So a person who's developing, they're 8 or 9 years old, and they need some support in learning how social communication can be very functional, both as a communicative device, as a social connection, as transmitting information, right? Because it's a
Mhm.
great vehicle for all those things.
That's
So I'm
right.
going to sit down in that clinic room and I'm going to devise activities that I engage in with that child that are going to elicit that behavior. Now, I'm not um, Maleficent, suddenly, to quote a character, because I've entered into this person's life and I'm trying to tinker with their brain or
Mhm.
put
Right.
thoughts in their mind that aren't their own. No, I'm supporting their behaviors
Hmm.
that will be very functional later in life and even currently. And in fact, I am actually trying to tinker a little bit with their brain because I want to change the way they think about their behavior in that moment of communication, whether it's because they're learning how to look at a person and say, hello, how are you? And have some form of dyadic communication with that individual, or whether it is to request appropriately for something rather than just grabbing or whatever it is, the social
Sure.
skill I'm working on. And so, okay, now we're going to fast forward to, well, what does this have to do with AI? If we think about using AI in the way that Solomon Kahn has proposed, and in the way that I feel like, and I know, Brenda, that you agree with this, would be functional in our use with AAC training in particular.
Mhm.
It's really not about replacing anything that that person is doing. It's letting the technology support what happens in that moment in a way that elicits a behavior that is more functional and appropriate
Mhm.
in a way that when there's no human present, like me in the clinic room, or maybe a parent, or maybe indeed when the parent is there or a sibling, and that
Mhm.
software is able to augment the stimuli to
Mhm.
elicit an appropriate response from that person, we're actually getting further than we would without it. And I think that's so when I use the term accelerant as a way to describe the effect of AI in learning, that's what we're talking about. It has nothing to do with replacing anything. It has to do with
Right.
amplifying and growing.
I love that idea of accelerant, and it's another support. You're saying it's not taking over, it's not in place of something, it's another support to accelerate. Hmm.
Yep.
It's a great
And
way to
I
think
will
of it.
even use another example. I remember there was an article, and I will misquote myself if I try to remember what it was, but it was Light and colleagues years ago did a study, and they were talking to kids who do not use AAC about technology, and then they were talking to kids who use AAC and technology and asking them to describe their speech generating devices and their systems. And they described them in the ideal sense as being in a form of like a companion. So we think of them as a device. It's
Mm-hmm.
software, it's a device, and we trip over the symbols and the color of the background and how big the borders are and all that. Of course, that's all really important. But we don't think in terms of a companion that lives next to this person, almost like a happy alien that helps, sort of support them. And and yet, if uh, if appropriately configured and appropriately managed, then there is the potential for a system to act as that kind of third party companion.
Mm-hmm.
So that if if Sarah and Brenda are working with Chris in a room, or maybe out at the zoo, and we're on a field trip for school or whatever, and I'm using a communication system, and you're with me, and I'm in my power mobility, and we're near the elephant exhibit, and my device suggests to me that um, that elephants make a certain noise, or says, do you want to make this noise as one of my options, or whatever elephants do.
Mm-hmm.
You have the option then to either interact with me because I've made that noise, appropriate or inappropriate as that is, or to maybe elicit from me something about elephants because the computer's made that available to me. And you
Right.
haven't
Hmm.
had to come in and do it for me. The computer's done
Hmm.
it. So this is that support concept, um, not imposing in an inauthentic way and
Right.
taking,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Well, and I think it's important to realize that is that all communication requires more than one person.
Hmm.
And that's a pretty obvious statement to say, but it's like once you realize that if it's conversation or if it's written communication, the intent is that there's at least two people involved. And so basically, all communication is in some ways co-constructed because a communication is a dialogue or a back and forth. And so there's a co-constructing of social communication conversations, co-constructing of written language, especially in a teaching situation where we're teaching a child on how to write and what they're doing. So we're never getting away from co-construction because that is what communication is. It's more than one person constructing a thought or an idea. I think that the light bulb went on for me when I realized how many times, like in a classroom, a paraeducator is like, "Okay, do you want to do this, this, or this?" They're automatically giving some choices, right? And the student is making that a decision based on the three choices given to them. And we thought, oh, okay, now we have the device. Now they don't have to wait for now they're not waiting for those three choices, except for, oh, now we're at the zoo and we're talking about elephants, and guess what? There's no other statements on the device pre-constructed. It takes way too long to construct your own. So now the paraeducator is going to say, do you want to make a sound like an elephant? Do you want to talk about how big it is? Or do you have a question about, do you have a question about the elephant? We're still doing that kind of limited choice selection of ideas due to the rate the how slow AAC it can be when you're accessing it and the lack of vocabulary for the moment, right? And we haven't thought to pre um, program all the things we could possibly say at the zoo. So then you think about the artificial intelligence piece of that, and it's like the rate enhancements there, the natural, the word length of utterance or an actual statement as opposed to a word, and suddenly there's pure engagement because it's sounding much more typical, and they're moving through what all kids are talking about in the moment.
Yes. So yes, and that co-construction, which is what you just started with, is essential. And I think that therein lies the a large part of the landscape that is very useful, as opposed to where I think a lot of the fear is, and I think well-placed fear
Hmm.
of a situation whereby, say, a student could have access to AAC, be using that all the time, maybe be able to type part of one word,
Hmm.
and then the computer, through its interaction with a GPT, chat GPT of some kind or another, large language
Hmm.
model, comes up with sentences about that are far beyond not only the capacity of that individual, where they are with their language development,
Hmm.
doesn't reflect who they are or how they would say things,
Hmm.
is literally putting words and sentences in their mouth in a way that's very unconstructive, and in fact doesn't facilitate the kind of learning and development that we've just been heralding as this great opportunity. And I think that's a really important distinction to make in our
Hmm.
conversation today,
Yes.
because co-construction gives the ability for us to manage what we're having that AI do. And to bring this back to Solomon Kahn for just a minute, one of the first things he talks about in the book that you and I both read that
Hmm.
stimulated this talk is that he's very forthright about the degree of management that he imposes on
Hmm.
AI, and what he wants that technology to be able to do is very quickly ascertain what uh how much that person knows, how much that student, we'll use student for now, how much that student knows about the particular subject. Because as the AI gets a good handle on that, then it can always work the thick, soft edge, outer edge of that knowledge and draw that student forward into learning more and building on what they already know.
Hmm.
And
So
that's what we're talking about.
it's like a scaffolding
It
of,
is.
okay.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So that, but that's that co-construction piece, because
Hmm.
if we're co-constructing, either the software is smart enough to do that, or we as co-constructors can manage the situation in that moment,
Hmm.
because we're only accessing in the examples we've been using the
Hmm.
AI in that moment
Right.
for
Hmm.
purposes of that therapeutic intervention.
So that's
Hmm.
interesting. I've seen, some AAC systems that are doing what you said. They're giving sentences, and it's maybe not what the AAC user was thinking about or is going in a different direction. And so what you're saying, it's either the software that is doing that or the partner, right? So there is a bit of both. There's us learning just like we do in other therapeutic, situations, right? How to support, but then also the devices. So, will you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing at Smartbox with AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that's important to note is that as soon as we started working with AI, which has now been years ago, and I'm not talking about word prediction, which is AI also, but I mean the way that we're discussing it here today. We very quickly formulated a code of ethics that is an internal, it perfectly, like, it's on our website, so anyone can use it and abide by it. But internally, it's a document that we reference constantly in this work, and it without reviewing it entirely, I'll say that what it does is that it does everything possible to respect individual agency, that we will always work with people who use AAC as we work with AI in any way that has anything to do with our software, because we need the voices of people who use this on a daily basis to help us understand its utility and when it's not.
Hmm.
Um, so there's been guiding principles that I will say proudly, but by no means with any hubris, have been guiding our work. And
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
been restrictive. And I think that's why when you ask, well, what are you doing with AI? We're not doing everything we could do. And the reason we haven't done that is because when we've started to look at, say, broad topic or sentence generation without some borders, then it can very quickly no longer represent what the person using that system, and I'm talking about it from a person who uses AAC regularly or not,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
it no longer represents accurately what that individual is thinking or intends.
Hmm.
So we've stayed away from that for now, especially until we know how to architect the commands to
Mm-hmm.
be as useful as possible and as authentic as possible for people. So then, specifically, then, well, what does that translate into? Um, we just actually rolled out our first public version of more broad AI, which we call a fix tool. And, it's kind of fascinating. Here we are talking about all this highfalutin developmental stuff and therapeutic intervention, the rest of it. And we started looking at what we were seeing with how people were using AI when it was in our test versions of the software. And we realized, wow, they're using it a lot to just fix mistakes. And
Mm-hmm.
then we did some internal research, almost exclusively with people who are adults that have had language and then lost it for some reason due to ALS or a stroke or what have you. And they're typing. And what we learned is that people who were using AAC were spending up to a third of their time correcting their mistakes.
Wow.
So there's a certain psychology in this on the one hand, but it's also just the reality of, you mentioned how long it takes to produce a
Hmm.
message earlier, and that's frustrating. But at the same time, it's also frustrating to type the wrong spelling or
Hmm.
to miss out. You type the whole statement, the utterance, and you realize that three of the words went together because you forgot to hit the space bar,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So what's nice about AI in this regard is that we were immediately able to take almost a third in some cases of time out of the equation, give that back to the individual because they could just type without worrying about what the spelling errors were, the punctuation errors, the misplaced space bars, type the statement, which at times can look almost like gobbledygook, right?
Hmm.
But hit the fix tool and it would instantly, with tremendous accuracy,
Hmm.
fix all the mistakes and make it a whole statement for that person to then just say or to use in an email or a text message or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's an example of super useful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it doesn't pull I mean, there's zero pressure on the agency of the individual because they're typing what they want to say in this case.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
so, so I think that's a
So
good cut
let's
and
talk
dry
about that
example.
for a second, though, because there's
Yeah.
two things there. One is that especially with alternative access, meaning eye gaze or switch access, sometimes the spelling errors are not actually errors at all. They're access errors.
Yes.
Right. And so it's like they were looking at the right letter, but it grabbed the one next to it, and they were able to just keep going because the device could figure that piece out. And I think it's important to know when anytime you're using AAC, what are you measuring? And if you're not measuring spelling, if this is not a spelling test, which most of the time it is not, then the fix tool is just rate enhancement for effective communication, which most of the time that's what we're measuring is like how can we effectively communicate? So immediately people are like, oh, but then they're never going to learn how to spell. And it's like, guess what? A lot of us can't spell, and a lot of us can't spell well. And it hasn't, because of our own tools for spell check and for word prediction, we are getting on with our lives, right? So I think it's important that sometimes people go, oh, well, if we have it fixed, then we can't see that then we're not holding them to a standard of spelling. And it's like, that's not the goal of this part of this piece. So I think one thing is always looking at what are we measuring when we're doing something so that the user is getting credit for the thoughts and the ideas and the effort and that we're not measuring access right now. We're letting them express their ideas. And I think like just I was working with a girl the other day and um she wrote like FLRNC and Florence comes up and then ORG and Oregon. And then she does the fix it tool and it's Florence, comma, Oregon, and Florence and Oregon are both capitalized. So I just paused the eyes and I said, whoa, let's take a look at that. And I had taken picture of her message window, and I said, so this is how they changed, because it's a city, it's capitalized, because it's a state, it's capitalized, and because when we put a state and a city together, they put a comma, and that's just something for you to know. And then you move on. I mean, but you have these teachable moments even in the Fix It tool.
Yes.
Right.
And that's the key, is the intent. I mean, so thank you, Brenda, because that is exactly right. It's the intent of the moment that matters most. I mean, let's get back to the mantra in our field. You are what you pay attention to. The whole human learning field. You are what you pay attention to. And we are. And so if we have the ability in the moment of communication, when really the point of that moment is a fluid transmission of information or social connection,
Mhm.
which could include humor, which is very time sensitive, as we all know, and context sensitive, and that's the point, then a tool like a fixed tool becomes really relevant. If the intent of the moment is because we are in a classroom and we are in the middle of a spelling exam,
Mhm.
well, then maybe the fixed tool is the most inappropriate tool
Mhm.
there because we'll be concentrating on the lesson of the day and whatever the target words are, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So we really do have to honor exactly the point that you just made. And I would say that that is true also for some of the other uses of AI. And Sarah, getting back to your initial question, that we're of course investigating too, which is more on that content language symbol prediction level. And it has all of the potential foils and ethical dilemmas that we're constantly trying to navigate. And it also has this tremendous opportunity to be an additive to these teaching moments and to provide a level of participation context and relevant expansion of in really concrete ways, whether that's the language, which could be a new form of a word
Mm-hmm.
grammatically or
Mhm.
morphologically,
Mhm.
or it could literally be a different word to describe something
Mm-hmm.
that that
Mhm.
individual didn't know yet. And yet here's this opportunity for them to learn it.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah. So those are other areas that we're looking at. And I think that uh, that those are going to be slower to come to the fore because of all of the foils that we're referencing at this point. But I also feel like um, it's analogous a little bit to another access modality, which is brain-computer interface, and which will be a part of our work in the coming decade.
Mm-hmm.
There are already wearable versions of BCI out there, which of course are very useful if you have a large language model running with them and you have the ability to infuse other aspects of AI into that tool. They're running into all the same ethical questions headlong. They're also seen as being just as surmountable as the ones we're discussing today. The key is that we move slowly, that we involve people who use AAC every step of the way, and that we dissect each of these issues well enough to understand how they fit into what we're trying to accomplish and how to deal with them in a way that's meaningful and that doesn't put anybody at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I love
Mhm.
that you have that, the code of ethics and that it is a slow move because it's not like AI is going to go away, right? This is with us. This is something where kids are growing up using it. We're learning how to use it. And so it does just keep that focus in mind and keep us grounded to say,
Yeah,
okay, let's make sure we're doing this the right way.
absolutely. And I think to your point, we're still at the thin edge of the blade. We're barely getting going with what is possible. And I mean that on all sides of the issue. And so I find that to be very exciting because if we stay in front of it and we stay informed about it and we're using it enough to understand where it can be useful and where it is risky, then we're going to be able to make those good decisions.
Hmm.
And so
Mhm.
If we stand back away from it and just keep pointing a finger at it and saying, "Don't come at me," then we're going to be run over at some point.
Right.
Um, I think that part of that will include, here we are. We just spent a great conversation talking essentially about large language models using various algorithmic permutations to be more or less accurate in different situations. We have not even yet had the conversation about, well, what happens when the camera is active? What happens when the microphone is always on so that it can
Mhm.
glean from the environment what is most appropriate to this person? And what does that then start to imply for how that device is configured and how that might be beneficial to that person
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
Tell us
infringe on
about
their
that.
rights, that's like everybody else's. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
and that's right around the corner.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
something interesting to think
super
about.
exciting.
Is that something that you are working on yourself or just
Yeah, I think the field in general is. So, uh, there's a lot of thinking around, how is it that you take a record, like we're recording this. That's great. You've had my full and utter consent. I trust both of you with my life, Sarah, we don't know each other well, but I know Brenda well enough that I would trust her.
I
So
feel so honored.
yeah, so well, it's all good. So that's great. Full consent. But if we're out, again, if we use the zoo example or we're at a cafeteria, let's
Mhm.
say,
Hmm.
hundreds of
Mhm.
young people having lunch, throwing food, doing all the things they do. And here are five people using AAC systems, and four of those five have an active microphone
Hmm.
and a camera, which is,
Mhm.
I mean, I have active microphones, they're
Hmm.
attached to my head on both sides. I
Mhm.
have an active video camera, with my optics, with my eyeballs. And
Mhm.
but so in a way we're trying to provide that to this person who uses AAC, but because the data then could possibly be a little more durable than what I can certainly remember. Um,
Mhm.
Hmm.
my working memory is about as long as a toothpick, but but that's fine. So it makes it really safe to have conversations with me. But from a technology standpoint, that could
Yes.
be uploaded to the cloud and then it's there forever.
Right.
So we're having to think through some very structured technical management systems whereby if audio comes into a machine, it is somehow processed in a way that can be anonymized quickly, yet at the same time made relevant to that moment of the machine's processing and thinking, and then
Mm.
thrown away. And thrown away in a way that no one can put it back together again.
Right.
Right.
And that starts to ask a lot. It's not asking too much of current technology, but it's asking a lot. And it's certainly something we have not thought much about to this point in human history around
Right.
AAC.
Well, that sounds like a whole nother can of worms in a way, but an exciting thing to think about too. I mean, I come at the AAC come from the perspective of working with kids in schools, and
Mhm.
that is another thing that when you're in school, there's all different sorts of environmental barriers or things that come up. I'm thinking about like, the child who wants to have pictures of their classmates in their AAC system, and then we have permission to do that. So thinking about I hadn't thought about what you were just describing and what that might look like, but I'm hopeful that these are things that we work through and figure out.
Yes, well, so, we could go a little more Star Trek with the whole thing and say, well, there's a point where we're all dealing with augmented reality to some degree, whether it's because of some haptics on our watch or whether on my glasses I'm getting information, and that is communicative when I'm in a shared Wi-Fi environment in such a way that I can give permission to someone who I'm in the same space with, maybe with a blink of my eye, maybe
Hmm.
with a more explicit move of some kind whereby I need to maybe get within proximity of their machine and make a gesture or something that lets that device know it's okay. I've given you permission or whatever
Hmm.
in some way that doesn't require a wet signature with a pen on a
Right.
piece of
Hmm.
paper from a parent, or
Right.
whatever. And that's why I say there's just like when we talk about with BCI, where we're talking not decades, but like a decade or so, where the expectation is that there will be more and more of this kind of in and around our lives,
Hmm.
because it is going to take a while for both the technology to emerge, 'cause some of it we don't have yet, or be configured in a way that's useful, and that it is that we are managing it in a way that protects the people we work with in the way that you just described.
Hmm.
It still gets to the goal because let's face it, all the things that Brenda said earlier, that started all this conversation off about where we can get with a student is that's the point. That's the point
Right.
of us actually getting into this line of work.
Hmm.
But I mean,
Impact.
I just was in evaluation this week, and the woman was sitting there, and I was showing her some paperwork, and she goes, "Uh-huh," and she held the paper up, and she goes, "Take a picture, take a picture, take a picture." And she has glasses on that's taking pictures of everything. And I don't know if there was video recording potential in her glasses. I can't remember if I even asked her that or if that's on the market. But I mean, then my coworker was like, "How much were those glasses?" And she's like, "I don't know, like $300. They're covered by my insurance, just like normal glasses." And so I can take pictures and do all that kind of stuff. No permission required. We were in a facility, we were in an ABA facility, and she can just say, take a picture, and that's
Hmm.
going somewhere, that's doing something. So the technology is already out there and being used and potentially abused. And so I'm not to say that that's permission to do it. That's saying that it's out there. So we need to be aware of it. We can't just say, well, that's not going to work. I remember, I mean, in the very beginning of my career, we were working with co-writer and draft builder, and there was already concerns about was that too much support for writing. And in order to use those tools, the student was going to write and then email the assignment to the teacher. And they said, no, email, no, students don't get to have email addresses. I mean, that's where we started. So
Right.
you forget that there was the resistance to all of these things every step of the way, right? And for good reason, because at that point it was like, can then anyone potentially email these middle schoolers, was where I was at, inappropriate information. So it's like, how are we managing that? So yes, they all got to get an email address, but then what were there what was in place to protect the child that was using that, right? So it's the way the way technology has always come through. There's some fear, there's wanting to make sure that everyone's safe. We all went into the field to help children do learn more and expand their language and become. Sometimes I question because we say independent communicators, and I do believe that's true, but the co-construction thing is real too. We are independent communicators, but it's always being impacted by the environment and the people we're talking to.
Absolutely. And if we use the example that I use over and over again about the people who will grow up and become teenagers and test very poorly in certain spelling or math um, categories because they've used AAC their whole life, and it has nothing to do with their intellect. Um, at times it does,
Hmm.
but at times it does for people that don't use AAC.
Hmm.
So sorry, but the point I'm
Right.
making is that the um, uh, giving people the experience to learn is what we're really talking about here today. And
Hmm.
so if we
Hmm.
all agree that we know what we know because we learned it, I love to play the piano. Had I not sat down at
Hmm.
the piano as a kid and learned how, I wouldn't know how to play the piano. And there are literally a million things I don't know anything about because I didn't learn it. Well,
Hmm.
then, for that person who's using
Hmm.
AAC, let's not restrict them from having the potential advantage of getting exposed to more.
Mm-hmm.
With all the caveats we've already mentioned, so we don't need to recycle the
Hmm.
first part of this conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
the three of us have an understanding of all of those
Right.
potential pitfalls and the reasons why it needs to be well managed and all the rest of
Sure.
it. But at the same time, um, giving a person the opportunity to interact with, um, let's classrooms do this a lot. They'll invite someone in who has snakes or a bearded dragon lizard or whatever, and they come in to the classroom, and all the kids get a chance to touch it and talk about it, and that's part of their science thing for the week.
Mm-hmm.
So the person using AAC is often at a massive disadvantage for a myriad of reasons. It's more difficult to interact with that other animal. It's more difficult to talk about it. The language, the ability to expand on the language or be corrected by the person who's there with the lizard, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
that can help them the child will say, "Oh, it's an alligator," and then the person will say, "Oh no, actually that's a bearded, it's called a bearded dragon. It's kind of a lizard, and they live to be this, and they're usually
Right.
whatever, 24 inches long." Um,
The timing.
the
Oh.
timing,
Mm-hmm.
that person using AAC is not, generally speaking, getting even a quarter of that level of interaction,
Mm-hmm.
relevant communication, ability to
Right.
participate. And it means they're going to test more
Right.
poorly on that later. Not only that, it might not even be something they
Right.
talk about later in the day because it kind of wasn't relevant. It was just another thing that happened in the classroom along with all the other things that happened that they had very little interaction with. And so ultimately, what we're talking about here is what are current vehicles that can enable more of that without just having to get a school
Hmm.
district to pay for five other classroom assistants to surround that person all day and
Right.
act like their personal AI.
Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, to me,
Exactly.
that's where that developmental potential is so strong.
Yes. So, Chris, you mentioned the idea of co-constructing, and Brenda, you guys talked about that, and you passed along an article, a white paper on AI and learning differences to Brenda, which she shared with me, and I thought that was fascinating, with kind of some guiding principles and ideas. Do you want to share about that at all, or anything that stood out for you?
So for us, I will say us collectively that are working in this field right now, and I would include all of my colleagues in the development of this technology, including those at Tobii Dynavox, Pranky Romic, Saltillo, at places like Alan over at FlexSpeak, who's doing just an awesome job putting together an AI infused app. We're all we're I've for well, I will say with confidence, with all the conversations I've had with everybody I've been working with around this, there are some guiding principles that we're following, and they are anchored around agency, privacy, and by the way, not just the privacy of the individual who's using AAC that is AI infused, but the privacy of the people surrounding and supporting that individual as well. Um, and then data protection, which is kind of along those same lines because it's
Hmm.
both so I'll give you an example. Most of us right now, when a person is using AAC and it is connected with the internet and doing an AI thing, or even if it's on board the machine, the data that that person puts in gets thrown into, like, you type a message. Let me say it that way. I'm calling it data, but it's like you construct a message. And then that, before it gets handed off to the AI, gets essentially anonymized in a way that can't pin it to that individual. And that way, that individual isn't giving up something of their own to a larger collective without
Mm-hmm.
wanting to.
Right. Right.
Um, so those are the guiding principles that really lead. Uh,
Hmm.
I mean, I think the one that you referenced, which is
You
co-construction,
know,
is
Hmm.
extremely important for
Hmm.
reasons. But go ahead, Brenda, you were going to say.
well, it's an interesting thing about agency because I think that's our role all the time with AAC. So,
Mhm.
I was working with a tool that was, we had, by the way, AI is extremely prompt dependent. And I think anyone who's ever typed anything into ChatGPT and it sticks out, so it spits out something and you're like, oh, I guess I needed to qualify that with these words, right? You change your prompt because you see what it kicks out and you go, no, that's not it. But I was playing around with a prompt on like how would you say there was some keyword subject verb predicate that was given to me by the AAC user, and then I was saying um reword with teenage language vocabulary. And so it came up and the word lit came up. And so, and she had a face, and I said, do you like the word lit? And she says, no. So I'm looking at her saying, seeing, they gave six suggestions. And the one she liked the one. And then when I read it, she had a face on that word lit. And again, we're looking for agency. We have to always be looking for agency. This might be close enough, but I'm not accepting it close enough. I'm seeing that of the six things that this came up, this large language sample came up with, this is the one you like. I'm also seeing the frown on this word. So a similar word option in AI is like, let's look at synonyms. I mean, if you want to make it, sound fancy, we can call them
Sure.
synonyms. But, let's look at other words like that, like lit, and see if there's something that would fit in this sentence that's more matching what's in your head. I
Hmm.
think anytime we're working with people with AAC, we need to be saying, think about what it is that you want to say. Got it? If not, I'm gonna wait. This is what I've been doing more and more as I use my AI. Do you have the idea? Great. Give me some clues. And I think done a disservice to our AAC users by reducing to yes, no. And again, then their co-construction is limited very much by your ideas or the communication partner ideas or the para's ideas, right? So I've started to construct to advise people, they need to give you three pieces of information before you construct anything from AI because they have to be the author of this sentence.
I
So
like it.
now I have these three pieces of information. Great. And maybe it's a subject, maybe it's verb, maybe it's three actions. I don't know, but they are going to be the author of this sentence and they have to give me some information. Then we're going to dissect it again and go, is this the word you're thinking of? And how long is that going to take? I don't care. I don't care if it takes me a half hour to write a sentence because every step of the way I'm respecting agency, the agency over the words they're picking, and I'm checking for knowledge. Do you know what lit means? Let's see what they say lit means. I think told you, Chris, when somebody put in feminine hobbies or something like that, and like all these things came up. It was like calligraphy, knitting, all these things. And the kid went to people and said grandma. And I'm like, yeah, this large language sample is a little 1950s right now, isn't it? Those are
Yeah,
not the feminine hobbies you're thinking of because your mom went paddleboarding. So that
right.
wasn't on there. And I know that. And guess what? Paddleboarding's not in her device either. Right. So it was things that we like to do with my mom. And anyways, it went on. But I'm just saying, like, I think agency is one of those things that whether we're using AI or not, we should be working on. And we should be thinking about how are we giving agency, preserving agency in our AI prompts as well as even in AI responses. Don't just take that sentence that gave you. Let's be sure. How did this match what was in your head?
Totally agree. And I think that there is an implicit part of everything that you just said that we all operate with, which is if a person wants to use the AI a certain way, that is part of that agency experience. And if they don't, that's fine too. I think
Hmm.
I can certainly speak for myself and my colleagues and say that we are very, very aware that there are people who use AAC every day that are very uninterested in using AI or having any AI features active as part of their system. And that is 100% perfectly fine. And I remember
Sure.
a conference that I was at last year, there were people who use AAC standing up saying, I can't wait for AI to be used all the time on my device because it takes me so long to type anything. I've been frustrated my entire life. I don't care if it sounds like me or not. I just can't wait to talk faster. And other
And
people said, I know AI is coming. I want to say everything the way I say it. And I'm not even going to apologize for the fact that I talk slower than everybody else and I communicate slower
Hmm.
because that's how I communicate. And I don't really want to communicate differently. I want to know that every letter I type and every word I say is the way that I'm typing it. I know it takes a long time. Please listen to me. And
Hmm.
so it's like those are
Hmm.
two, they're not even oppositional. It's all part of the environment we work with. And
Yeah,
I
it's
think
all agents.
agreed. And I think one of the we speak uh a lot about, oh, our goal is to normalize AAC, and I wear glasses and no one says anything about it. People wear hearing aids or power mobility or whatever. No one, we just all accommodate that. And yet we have not been able to normalize communication supports yet as part of the human experience.
Hmm.
That's true. But the use of AI isn't the exclusive way to normalize anything. And I think that we're going the wrong direction if we think of it that way. Is it a way
Hmm.
that many people can benefit from the developmental impact that we've talked about today, from being faster communicators, uh, and growing their vocabulary and all of that? Yes. Is it absolutely contingent that every person use it to get there? No. It's just
Hmm.
it's just one way.
Right.
And
Hmm.
we do a disservice by not pursuing it. We do a disservice if we're trying to shove it down everyone's throat. So I
Yeah.
think it's
We do a disservice by requiring it,
yep,
right?
Yeah, that's a
yep,
great point.
absolutely.
And it's really individualized, as is AAC. And yeah, I love that point. Chris, we really appreciate having you on today,
It's great to be here.
talking about AI as an accelerant and scaffolding and how we can support that. Excited about that fix tool to increase rate.
Yeah.
So much to think about. We just appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I look forward to any other time in the future to interact with either one of you, both of you.
And also just a plug, Chris and I are speaking at Closing the Gap this year in Minnesota. We'll be talking about this. We'll be talking about some of case studies and things like that. So, and at ATIA actually.
Yeah,
So, I would say that's something to keep an eye out for.
Great.
for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again,
Thank you
Chris.
both. Take care.
This podcast is produced by the Special Education Technology Center, administered by Central Washington University, and funded in part by OSPI. However, the content does not necessarily represent the policy of CWU and OSPI, and you should not assume endorsement by the state government.